This is your reality check.
Hi everyone, and welcome to The Reality Check, the weekly Canadian show that explores a wide range of controversies and curiosities using science and critical thinking. This is your show for Tuesday, November 8th, 2016. I'm your host, Darren McKee. And with me, as usual, are Adam Gardner.
What's up, Cube Girls?
Cristina Roach.
Hello, everybody.
And producer Pat.
Hi, everyone.
We have a great show for you today. I'm going to look into that male birth control study that supposedly was stopped because men are wimps.
I saw that. I saw that headline.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
But first, Cristina, daylight savings time reality check.
If you feel a little more logy this week than in past weeks, it may be because daylight saving time ended last Sunday. And if you thought you were seeing more news about daylight saving time this year than in past years, it's actually not your imagination. 2016 marks the 100th anniversary of daylight saving time. By the way, you'll hear many people say daylight savings time, but there's actually no S at the end of saving.
You know, I was just thinking you were pronouncing it kind of weird.
Yep.
And I guess I'm guilty of pronouncing it wrong my entire life.
I better stop listening now in case I learn something else.
Wow.
So DST is observed in North America with the exception of Arizona and Hawaii and a couple of other territories in the US, and most of Saskatchewan in Canada, which observes Central Standard Time year-round. DST is used in 78 countries and affects about 1.6 billion people worldwide.
Wow.
DST is not used in China, Japan, India, Russia, or most of Africa.
Causes me problems when I try to watch Sailor Moon.
It starts on the second Sunday of March when time jumps or springs forward an hour at 2 a.m., and it ends the first Sunday of November when clocks fall back an hour. So 100 years is a long time for misconceptions to be perpetuated, but judging by some of the stuff people were posting in news feeds, I'm sure you guys saw some of it too because Pat mentioned it to me, a lot of stuff many people think they know about DST is actually wrong. So I thought it would be a great topic to tackle this week.
So can I tell you the misconception I saw that kind of launched this was that this was about farming.
Right. That is one of the biggest ones.
That's what I've always heard.
So one of the most rampant misconceptions is that DST was started by farmers. It sounds pretty logical. More daylight allows farmers more time to work in the field, right? But in truth, it's something that farmers were opposed to from the beginning.
What?
True. According to Michael Downing, author of Spring Forward, The Annual Madness of Daylight Saving Time, farmers were the only organized lobby against DST in U.S. history.
Wow.
In a National Geographic interview, he cites that farmers were the reason the U.S. never had a peacetime daylight saving time until 1966, explaining that it left the farmers one less hour of sunlight to harvest their crops and get them to market. So many dairy farmers as well complained that the sudden shift throws off cows' natural milking schedules.
Oh, that's surprising, actually.
Dr. David Perar, who authored the book Seize the Daylight, The Curious and Contentious Story of Daylight Saving Time, breaks down the history of another long-standing notion that Benjamin Franklin created DST. Franklin is, after all, credited with the famous proverb, early to bed and early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise. When Franklin was the American envoy to France, he pioneered the concept that Parisians could save more money on candles by making better use of daylight and waking up earlier in the morning. But we're talking the 18th century here, when standard timekeeping really wasn't a thing yet. The official father of DST is credited to an English outdoorsman named William Willett in the early 1900s. The story goes that Willett was on a ride before breakfast and noticed that Londoners were wasting daylight by sleeping through a big part of the day. Maybe he should just mind his own business, don't you guys think? Seriously. He lobbied Parliament in Great Britain, who were not so keen on the idea. And it wasn't until after he died in 1915 that his vision became reality when Germany adopted DST, hoping it would save energy during World War I. Soon Great Britain followed suit, as did the US in 1918 when they became embroiled in the Great War. However, DST was very unpopular, and the farm lobby was pretty powerful, so Congress signed a repeal after World War I. DST was reinstated during World War II with the reasoning once again that it would save needed energy during the war effort. Which leads us to another well-held myth. Proponents of DST have argued that it helps reduce energy consumption since more daylight results in people using less lighting and electricity. Even in 2000, the U.S. Department of Energy continued to push this notion, using speculative studies to back up their argument, even though the Department of Transportation, kind of an authority on time zones, gave up on the theory. It wasn't until 2008 when a breakthrough study done by economists at the University of California illustrated that DST not only didn't reduce consumption, it actually increased demand. The study looked at a natural experiment in Indiana. In 2006, the state officially switched to DST, so researchers were actually finally able to measure how demand for energy changed.
Wow.
And according to the study, overall residential energy consumption increased as much as 4%. Indiana had to dole out an additional $9 million as a result of DST, suggesting the increased use of air conditioning in the evening attributed to the spike. So yeah, we may use less overhead lights, for instance, but on the other hand, we may be using more of other kinds of energy like gas or air conditioning.
And in truth, lights aren't a huge consumer of energy, comparatively speaking.
Unless they allow other productive tasks. But yeah, you're right, Pat.
I guess it depends where you live. Like in Canada, you're more likely to need to heat, whereas further south, you're more likely to need to cool.
So after the war, New York City, being the financial capital, continued to observe DST along with some other rando cities. And as you can imagine, this caused a few problems. In order to end the confusion, a National Uniform Time Act was passed in 1966. And even though fuel saving was cited as the original reason to observe the time change, the biggest proponent was the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. So, in reality, a national daylight saving policy was adopted because it hugely benefited the retail and outdoor entertainment industry. As Arthur Downing told the Daily Beast, at congressional hearings on daylight savings in 1985 and 1986, the golf industry by itself said that one extra month of daylight savings would be worth $400 million in additional green fees and equipment sales.
Wow.
400 million.
Yes. The barbecue industry said it would be worth $200 million in additional sales of grills and barbecue briquettes.
That's a lot of grills, really. I mean, to fit in a lot of mouths. I don't know how many faces there are, but that's quite a bit.
It's $200 million. Baseball was also a big supporter of extended daylight, and department stores especially loved the extra hour of daylight in the evening for people to shop. So I found this interesting. Daylight saving time was originally only 6 months long, but here we are in 2016 and it's 8 months long. Why? So retail lobbyists petitioned for an additional month of daylight saving in 1985, which I mentioned a little bit earlier, but then they petitioned another month in 2005. But a super interesting new study by JP Morgan Chase Institute suggests it's far from a given that local commerce actually benefits. They found that consumer spending on credit or debit cards in Los Angeles, for instance, only increased by 0.9% at the start of DST, with spending dropping about 3.5% at the end of daylight saving time. And they go on to say that debates over perceived benefits of DST really should be driven by empirical evidence.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so surely there must be some benefit to forcing our internal body clocks to feel off for a couple of weeks and commuting home in the pitch black darkness, right?
Because no one's ever set some kind of policy for a bad reason. Right?
Well, what about our health, guys? In theory, an extra hour of daylight to play sports or go for a walk would benefit our quality of life, you'd think. While there's no sweeping, conclusive study on the health effects of DST, there is some compelling research. A 2012 study conducted at the University of Alabama found the risk of heart attack went up by 10% on the Monday and Tuesday after moving clocks ahead in the spring. And no one can actually really explain why, other than to suggest sleep deprivation and the change in our circadian clock catches up to us over time.
But that's more of an argument against DST because it's the change that's jarring to people potentially because now I have to get up earlier than I'm kind of used to, right?
I guess that was my point, yeah.
Oh, okay.
I was thinking that's about moving the clocks ahead. What if you just never did that, huh? You just kept moving them back. Think about it.
Well,
Think about it.
I dig it. I'll do it.
This study also backs up findings published in the New England Journal of Medicine in 2008 that showed the risk of heart attacks rose in Sweden after springing forward. However, Darren, interestingly, the U of Alabama study lead author Martin Young did also find heart attack risk decreased by 10% when clocks fell back, which is some consolation.
Nice. So by that logic, if we just keep moving the clocks back,
right,
we'll get heart attacks.
Well, not so fast. Another study in 2009 found that people who worked in a mine had a 5.7% increase in injuries following the start of DST. And Global News just reported on a new study published in the Journal of Epidemiology last month that shows people who adhere to DST have an increased risk to mental health. The study showed depression diagnoses rose during the transition from DST to standard time. And data from the Danish Psychiatric Central Research Register from 1995 to 2012 shows an 8% increase in the number of cases of psych hospitals preceding the time change. Other studies, which I linked to in the show notes at trcpodcast.com, show the sleep deprivation from springing forward causes more traffic accidents, poor stock market trading, and loss of workplace productivity due to cyber loafing.
Cyber loafing. I love
That's
it.
a nice expression. Christina, you said there was an 8% increase in the number of cases preceding the time change?
Yes.
Like it was anticipatory psychological problems?
Preceding, like just before. Oh, maybe. I see what you're getting at. I didn't delve that deep into that, but that's an interesting point.
That's an odd stat, that's all.
Why don't you check the link at trcpodcast.com, Darren, and look at that study in depth.
I'll send in a note to the show.
So there you have it, guys. Daylight saving wasn't adopted to benefit the farmers, nor was it adopted to save energy, and its effects on the retail industry in this day and age, especially of 24-hour consumerism, has also come into question. Although there are many people who've signed petitions to abolish it, though, a CNN poll in 2014 found 33% of adults thought DST was, quote, worth the hassle.
And 67% said it wasn't.
Well, absolutely. One of the things that President Clinton had suggested she might do was to repeal DST, which I think is great, but I feel that whenever we make changes to DST, we need to agree to do it
5 years in advance for people who work in the computer industry.
Exactly. So the last time they changed it, Sun, which Sun doesn't own Java anymore, so it doesn't matter. They got bought out by Oracle. Sun released a patch for Java on the Friday before the time change, which was not good for people who had to apply those patches and work overtime on the weekend. So, yes, you need to let that stuff out.
Sounds like you know one of those guys, Adam.
I bet maybe might have been involved. So don't make these decisions last minute because it has impacts on people's lives.
I think it's interesting to think about the fact that we're not really losing an hour. Of course, it's just the hour is shifted. It depends what you kind of get up and go to bed. I look in the afternoon like, gee, it's dark early, but if I got up earlier, I wouldn't be losing out on anything. It does seem to be that transition or transactional cost of moving anyone's bedtime. It seems to screw up a lot of people, and for that reason alone, it might just not be worth it. We may be springing forward with male birth control, but they seem to be stopping studies. So I read on a Facebook post or two over the past week. Perhaps you've seen this. There was a male birth control study that was stopped due to adverse effects, or events, as they seem to call them in literature. And these headlines are typically not sympathetic to men. First, there is the USA Today headline, quote, "Male birth control study nixed after men can't handle side effects women face daily." Quote. Then there is this one from Cosmopolitan. "Men quit male birth control study because it was giving them mood swings," which is a bit better. But the subheading is, welcome to the club, dudes. Also, all caps, woman up.
Woman up?
Yep.
Oh, it's like man
and
up. I
below
get it.
that,
Yeah.
but before the actual article, is a huge gif of Dawson from Dawson's Creek crying.
Oh, that's a good gift.
Oh, that is a great gift.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a nice
I do
meme.
like it. Yeah.
And here's a quote from Cosmo. The study found that a male contraceptive injection could have a success rate of 96%. They studied 320 men between the ages of 18 and 45, injecting them with two hormones, progestogen to lower sperm counts, and testosterone to reduce the effects of progestogen. Progesterone also reduces testosterone, by the way. It was working until 20 men claimed they had issues and the study was halted. And then Cosmo quotes the study. Of these 20, 6 men discontinued only for changes in mood, and 6 men discontinued for the following simple reasons: acne, pain or panic at first injection, palpitations, hypertension, and erectile dysfunction.
Oh.
The other 8 men dropped out because of mood changes. Cosmo goes on to say that women typically have these problems, so men should ovary up. Given what the study says, and fair comparisons in mind, these writers are being, well, dicks? Now, the actual study was called Efficacy and Safety of an Injectable Combination Hormonal Contraceptive for Men. 320 men were in the study. Yep. The results were highly effective. That's also true. And yes, 20 men left the study. And yes, the study was halted. But it wasn't exactly because of these 20 men. Causality matters. As Dr. Jen Gunter, who's also an OBGYN, says, quote, the study was halted early as one of the 2 independent safety panels took issues with the high rate of side effects. This wasn't the researchers saying, oh, these poor men. This was an independent review board. The adverse events that raised concerns were acne, 45%, meaning 45% of all participants in the study got it.
Wow.
Increased libido, 38%. Emotional disorder, that's in quotes, 16.9%. Injection site pain, 23%. And myalgias, or muscle pain, 16%. One man committed suicide, which somehow the researchers said wasn't related to the drug because his family said he was stressed at work, and one attempted suicide. End quote. Now, Jen Gunter seems to imply that maybe the drug did cause the suicide, because there maybe wasn't enough screening of whether these people may have depression or not. But because there is no placebo control group you can do with contraceptive studies for obvious ethical reasons, you can't quite know. So to me, if the family said it wasn't because of the pill, I'm not sure if I'm going to say it might have been because of the pill, or imply it like Jen did. For these 320 men in the study, the researchers believe that 900 reports of adverse events were caused or linked to the contraceptive. As I said, causality is difficult because there's no control group. That's quite a bit. To be fair, the female birth control pill, or just the pill, is also known to have many side effects. This is another note. Perhaps we'll do another segment on just that and how the birth control pill can increase the risk of some cancers and decrease the risk of others, and there's a whole host of other things that are going on with the pill. But that's not quite what this segment's about. But many people also wrote that women get acne and mood swings too, so it shouldn't be a problem for men. But are they suffering to the same degree? Gunter says you have to compare similar things.
Yep.
People tell anecdotes, and those aren't data. This is quoting Gunter. You have to compare study with study, not a study with an op-ed column. The side effect rate is pretty high with this new study of men compared with studies of women. For example, and perspective, a study comparing the birth control patch with the pill found a serious adverse event rate of 2%. The pill reduces acne for 70% of women, and in studies with the Mirena IUD, the rate of acne is 6.8%. Now, different people bickered with Jen about what the rate of adverse events were. Jen said for women with the pill, adverse event rate is about 2%. Depending on how you crunch the numbers in this study, it's 1 to 3% for men. So you could say it's higher or lower. Depends how you might classify some of these adverse events or not. Apparently, the side effects were worse in this study, and an external review board is the one that stopped it. So don't be so quick to blame the men. Also, since when do we call people who drop out of studies wimps? Shouldn't it be their prerogative given their health and autonomy? Women do it. Should we call them weak? I don't think so. And from Vox.com, they linked a press release from this study that said, quote, despite the higher than expected number of adverse events, many participants expressed their satisfaction with the method and indicated that their partners were relieved that they did not have to bear the burden of contraception themselves. In addition, some men indicated their disappointment that they would not continue to receive the study drugs. Responses to key acceptability questions by male participants and female partners demonstrated high rates of satisfaction with the method of contraception applied in the study. Most of the couples would use the method of contraception, with 82% of male participants and 76% of female participants responding affirmatively.
Okay.
So it seems like the men even want to do it more than their partners. I'm not sure if that's a huge statistically significantly different number, though. So, but keep this in mind. This was a large-scale, multi country study involving 10 study centers, and there was some concern that many of the adverse events came from one of the study centers, which may have skewed the data. That's why the researchers said in the press release, quote, "Given the efficacy and acceptability of this method, despite side effects, there continues to be a strong rationale for continuing research." Good. So this just sounds like there was a study. It seemed to have some adverse events, possibly coming from one area. So they stopped it. They didn't say we shouldn't keep researching it. They just said we might have to think about differently how we're going to do that. Mm-hmm. Back to Jen Gunter for a moment. She said there were 4 interesting issues or questions that further research could help address. Number 1, as I said, a significant percentage of adverse events came from one study center. Number 2, none of the men appeared to have been screened for depression beforehand formally. Number 3, emotional disorders wasn't defined in the paper. She says perhaps it was in the study, but it wasn't in the actual paper. She said, "I'm a doctor and I don't know what that means." And so if you have about 16% of the people having emotional problems without really explaining what that means, that raises some concern. And number 4, for 5 men, it took more than 52 weeks, but less than 74 weeks, for spermatogenesis to recover. One man still had no return of adequate sperm for fertility for 4 years.
Oh, wow.
This is an important issue to think about because it could be for a small percentage of participants, there may be a risk of functional infertility, which is what people don't want at all if they're going on a birth control drug, which is not supposed to do that at all. Number wasn't high, but again, more research.
And when you're on birth control, you want to be able to stop it and then potentially have a baby.
That's exactly the point of that particular type of method versus something else.
Yeah.
Darren, you mentioned something about pre-screening for depression. What's the significance of that?
Well, these pills or any sort of hormonal injection could have an adverse effect on someone's mood or psychological state. And if you don't have a better baseline to screen out or don't have a better baseline to determine who you're including in certain studies, you may then not know how to attribute the causes and effects of the pills because, as I said, there's no control group. Typically for studies like this, they want people as so-called normal and as healthy as possible. So then they can figure out if a depressive episode occurs, it seems like it's probably linked to or attributed to the pill versus part of their normal life.
That makes sense.
But what have we learned? Well, the study wasn't stopped because of the men, but because of an external review panel. Secondly, the symptoms men were experiencing were worse or at least comparable than what typically happens on the pill. Therefore, can we conclude that men aren't crybabies and that they don't need to woman up? Yes. And maybe not. So Dr. Gunter does some interesting analysis of male vasectomy rates and finds that they are much less than women for tubal ligation. Dun, dun, dun.
Really?
Yes. Quoting Dr. Gunter, "Forget the study. We already have plenty of data on how women bear the burden of contraception when a similar option is available to both in the coupleship. Only 5% of American men have had a vasectomy, yet 15% of American women have had a tubal ligation. Almost weekly, I discuss contraception with a woman who is having issues with multiple methods. She and her partner have finished childbearing, and yet she can't get him to make an appointment to discuss vasectomy. She just rolls her eyes. She's given up asking. She assumed the not insignificant risk of pregnancy usually more than once, and yet she cannot get her partner to assume the insignificant risk of a vasectomy." Mm-hmm. What exactly does that say? Yeah, I know this is not all men, but it's a lot. And this, quite frankly, is bullshit. The numbers should be reversed. While vasectomy only applies to those finished childbearing, it is about as adverse event-free as contraception can be, and we still can't get all eligible men to have one. This is what makes me depressed about male hormonal contraception, because it is unlikely that there will ever be a contraceptive as easy and as safe as a vasectomy. We need more research into reversible male contraceptives, and hopefully what was learned from this study will be helpful. However, looking at vasectomy rates, I'm pretty pessimistic about the majority of men choosing it as an option. Here's hoping I'm proving wrong." End quote. Now, to be fair, Jen did criticize people using anecdotes, and then she kind of snuck one in there, which makes the case more compelling. But she does actually have data and stats about the rates of tubal ligation versus vasectomy as a means of birth control, not for other reasons. But if you just sort of think outside the box here, maybe men want to keep their options open. Maybe they shouldn't, but maybe they do. And there could be other reasons involved. That said, I do think men could be stepping up a lot more than they already are. And while this particular study, which got a lot of backlash of men not doing enough, doesn't seem the battle that women should be fighting, they do definitely have a case that, generally speaking, they do have to bear the brunt of a lot of the birth control. The history of the birth control is not at all pleasant, where a lot of women were forced to take it, and then women have been made to take it, and they've had to sort of shoulder that burden while men just don't do enough.
Yeah, it's interesting. I wonder if these numbers are changing over time or based on demographics. A lot of the fathers I know have had vasectomies. It seems very common.
Oh, is that an anecdote, Adam?
Well, yes,
I'm
it's
just
an
kidding.
anecdote. And maybe I just know more guys than girls, but I don't know many people that get their tubes tied anymore unless they're getting a cesarean and it's their last child and
Right.
they're
And
already kind of open or whatever.
One of the comments I read said that their insurance company covered the ligation, but not the vasectomy.
Well, that's messed up.
Well, that is. But you could say then there's a different... So the sexism is not necessarily for the man. It's then with the insurance company, perhaps?
Yes.
Even though I imagine
still a
tubal ligation might be more expensive. I'm not sure.
So for those of us who have actually stepped up, it's covered by, in our case, the provincial healthcare system. And number two, it was not as bad as you think it would be.
I have to say I was a bit surprised and disappointed by those stats that Gunter mentions. To Adam's point, I know a lot of men that have had vasectomies, and I know certainly in my situation, as you get older, it is dangerous for a woman to be on birth control in her 40s, and certainly you don't want to be screwing around taking estrogen. At least I don't. And tubal surgery, like, that is intense from what I understand. So yeah, I'm glad I have a husband that stepped up. That's all I have to say.
Thanks for joining us once again. Cristina explored daylight saving time and how it seems like there's no good reason for it whatsoever. And a lot of the reasons you thought it existed probably aren't true either. I looked into a male birth control study which was stopped by an outside panel for seemingly good reasons, but hopefully there'll be more research and something will come to market soon. Until next time, think better, act better.
Peace out, Clotus.
Stay classy, not smart-assy.
Don't be afraid of the vasectomy, guys.
For show notes or to discuss this episode, visit our Facebook page and website at trcpodcast.com. For general inquiries or to send a topic or parody suggestion, email info@trcpodcast.com. Help support the show by leaving a review on iTunes and liking us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter at TRC_podcast.
Outtakes.
The official father of DST is credited to an English outdoorsman.
I'm sorry.
The official father of DST is credited to an English outdoorsman named
No, it's not
William.
going to work.
2.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
You know what? Just cut his mic. We can't have this. Just cut his mic. Just cut his mic.
So the official father of DST is credited to an English.
It's not going to work.
This is totally going in the outtakes.
Okay.
Take 4.
Thanks, Cristina, for looking into daylight savings times, whether we fall back
Saving time.
I learned nothing.